We back. Back in West Africa. Let's see what just happened 4 hours ago. Something good all day, every day. You know, I'm loving it because I don't have to sit around and watch all this confusion. The enemy is the author of confusion. Yeah, it's gonna be. It ain't gonna be sweet, but come on, you got to have balance. We pushing balance. It's time to ignite our people. It's time to awaken. Let's listen to what the brother went and did good for his nation. You gotta check him out. All this confusion we hear over here, they going against this, they going against that. There's a hope when you recalibrate the actors in your the things that you bring into your world, such as who you choose to do business with, and how you choose to do business, who you choose to do business with. It matters. Fair use copyright, fair use copyright.
What happens when a 35-year-old African president walks into a room full of world leaders and refuses to play by their rules? When everyone expects him to beg, but he arrives with a proposal that could reshape an entire continent? Today's story takes place in the gleaming corridors of power in Riyadh, where billionaires.
Because you have politicians that's going before rulers who are wealthy. Well, you have a ruler of a wealthy nation that's going to talk with a ruler of another wealthy nation. Equals.
Decide the fate of nations over coffee, and where one man's refusal to bow changed everything.
He's not a politician.
This isn't just about money or politics. It's about dignity, respect. And what happens when someone dares to rewrite the script everyone expects them to follow? By the end of this story, you'll understand why a single conversation in Saudi Arabia sent shockwaves across 3 continents and made a poor nation into an equal partner overnight. The marble floors of the King Abdulaziz Conference Center reflected the morning light like mirrors, each surface polished to perfection. Outside, the Riyadh skyline stretched endlessly, glass towers reaching toward heaven, monuments to ambition and oil money. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and the subtle tension that always accompanies gatherings of the world's most powerful people. It was March 15th, and the Saudi Crown Prince's annual investment summit was about to begin. This wasn't just any business meeting. This was where fortunes were made and lost with a handshake, where entire economies could shift with a single nod of approval. The guest list read like a directory of global influence. Tech billionaires from Silicon Valley, oil executives from Houston, manufacturing moguls from Germany, and heads of state whose signatures could move mountains. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman entered the Grand Hall at exactly 9 a.m., his presence commanding immediate attention. At 38, he had already transformed Saudi Arabia's economy, launched futuristic city projects worth hundreds of billions, and positioned his kingdom as a bridge between East and West. His Vision 2030 plan was reshaping not just Saudi Arabia, but the entire Middle East. Today, he would decide which global partnerships deserved his kingdom's vast resources. The delegates had been arriving since dawn. Private jets lined the tarmac at King Khalid International Airport like luxury cars in a showroom. Each visitor had come with proposals, presentations, and promises. They spoke of renewable energy projects, artificial intelligence ventures, space, exploration initiatives, and smart city developments. The competition was fierce. Everyone wanted a piece of Saudi Arabia's $2 trillion public investment fund. Among the familiar faces were some surprises. The president of Singapore had flown in to discuss semiconductor manufacturing. Brazil's foreign minister brought proposals for agricultural technology exchanges. Even the Prime Minister of Estonia was there, pitching digital governance solutions. But buried deep in the day's agenda, almost as an afterthought, was a name that made many attendees scratch their heads in confusion. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. The whispers started immediately. Burkina Faso, the landlocked West. African nation that most people couldn't locate on a map. What could possibly bring their leader to a summit designed for economic superpowers? The country's entire GDP was barely $15 billion, less than what some attendees spent on weekend acquisitions. Their infrastructure was decades behind, their resources limited, their international influence minimal. It seemed almost absurd. Why is he even here? Murmured the German delegation. What does Burkina Faso have that Saudi Arabia could possibly want? The answer to that question would soon reshape everyone's understanding of power, partnership, and potential. As the morning sessions progressed, presentation after presentation followed the same predictable pattern. Sleek PowerPoint slides, impressive statistics, polished executives in $1,000 suits making carefully rehearsed pitches. The Crown Prince listened politely, asked strategic questions, and made non-committal promises to consider all proposals thoroughly. The atmosphere was professional but cold. Business is business, nothing more. Then came the lunch break. Delegates mingled in small groups, discussing market trends and exchanging business cards. The Saudi officials moved through the crowd like gracious hosts, ensuring everyone felt welcomed, but maintaining the careful distance that power requires. It was during this intermission that Ibrahim Traoré finally made his appearance. He was nothing like what the room expected. At 35, he was younger than most CEOs present, but carried himself with a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. Unlike every other delegate, he wasn't wearing a Western business suit.
No.
Instead, he wore his nation's traditional military dress uniform, not as a costume or a cultural display, but as a statement of identity and pride.
That's right.
The fabric wasn't expensive, the tailoring wasn't perfect, but something about his presence commanded respect.
Damn.
The conversations gradually quieted as people noticed him. Here was a man who clearly didn't belong in this world of billion-dollar deals and champagne networking.
It's clear
It
this
somehow
country
seemed
over
completely comfortable in
billions
his
of
own
dollars
skin.
in debt. You
He
slow.
didn't rush to introduce himself to influential figures or hand out business cards like confetti. He simply stood quietly, observing, waiting for his moment. When the afternoon sessions resumed, Traoré was scheduled to speak last. By that time of day, most delegates were already thinking about dinner plans and evening flights. The Crown Prince had sat through hours of presentations, his attention visibly waning despite his diplomatic politeness. Several attendees had already begun checking their phones and whispering about early departures.
Somebody else
Then the
got it.
moderator announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso." The polite applause was noticeably lukewarm.
Ibrahim, baby.
This was clearly viewed as the day's obligatory gesture toward African inclusion, a box to check rather than a serious business opportunity. Even the Crown Prince seemed to settle back in his chair with the resigned patience of someone enduring, a necessary formality. Traoré walked to the podium with measured steps. He carried no laptop, no presentation remote, no stack of documents. No slideshow appeared on the massive screens flanking the stage. Instead, he simply stood there for a moment, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. The silence stretched just long enough to become noticeable, just long enough to make people lean forward slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried clearly through the hall without amplification. "Your Royal Highness," he began, "distinguished delegates, I have a question for you. When you close your eyes and imagine the future, what do you see?" The room stirred slightly. This wasn't the usual opening. No gratitude for the invitation. No praise for Saudi hospitality.
What?
No demographic statistics about Burkina Faso. Do you see taller buildings, faster computers?
Stop playing.
More efficient machines? Traore continued. Or do you see human beings standing a little straighter, walking a little prouder, dreaming a little bigger? Crown Prince bin Salman's eyebrows raised almost imperceptibly. This was definitely not a standard investment pitch. Traore stepped away from the podium, moving closer to his audience. For the past 6 hours, I've listened to brilliant minds discuss market penetration, profit margins, and return on investment. All important metrics, all necessary calculations. But I've heard very little about the one resource that actually creates wealth, human potential. He paused, letting that statement settle. Your Highness, your kingdom has invested brilliantly across the globe. Silicon Valley startups, European manufacturing, Asian technology hubs. You've built partnerships with nations that already have wealth, infrastructure, and stability. But may I ask, when did you last invest in raw human hunger? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several delegates exchanged glances. This was beginning to feel less like a business presentation and more like a philosophical debate. I come from a place most of you have never heard of, Traore continued.
Jeez, King.
Burkina Faso,
That's right.
land of upright people. We have no oil reserve.
Hold on. Did y'all hear that? That's biblical, family. All I knew it was biblical. I didn't want to say nothing the first time. I have to read it for myself. But the upright people, them children of Israel, what he tell you he came from?
It's like our neighbors. No diamond mines like others. No vast coastlines for shipping. What we have is something far rarer in today's world. People who haven't yet learned that certain things are impossible. He reached into his jacket and withdrew something that made several people in the front row lean forward with curiosity. It was a small, weathered photograph. This picture was taken 3 months ago in a village called Garango, he said, holding it up. The boy in this photograph is 10 years old.
That's
His
him.
name is Musa.
Oh.
Until recently, he had never seen electric light. His village had no power grid, no generators, nothing. When the sun set, their world went dark. Traore's voice remained steady, but something in his tone had shifted. 3 months ago, we installed our first community solar panel in Garango. Not with foreign aid money, not with World Bank loans. With resources we generated ourselves through agricultural export reforms and mining efficiency improvements. And do you know what happened when that first light bulb illuminated Musa's home? The hall was completely silent now. Even the crown prince had stopped fidgeting with his tablet. He didn't celebrate. He didn't dance.
Listen.
He looked at his father and said, now we can study after sunset. Now we can build something. 10 years old, and his first thought wasn't about entertainment or comfort. It was about productivity and construction. Traore began walking slowly across the stage, his eyes moving
They
from
have a
face to
healthy
face.
respect for
That photograph
things we
represents
take
what I came
advantage
here to
of.
discuss. Not charity, not aid, not development assistance. Partnership. Real partnership between nations that have capital and nations that have hunger. He stopped directly in front of the Crown Prince's table. Your Highness, you've spoken eloquently about diversifying Saudi Arabia's economy beyond oil dependence. You've invested in artificial intelligence, renewable energy, tourism, entertainment, all wise strategies. But may I suggest that your kingdom's greatest opportunity lies not in replacing oil with technology, but in replacing transactions with transformation. The boldness of this statement rippled through the room. Several delegates
they come to
shifted
play with them.
uncomfortably.
Y'all
No one
see how
spoke
he
to Crown
moved?
Prince bin Salman this directly, especially not representatives from countries whose entire economies were smaller than Saudi Arabia's annual budget surplus. But Traore wasn't finished. Africa isn't a continent asking for handouts. We're a continent offering partnership. 54 nations with over 1 billion people, most under the age of 25. The youngest, most energetic population on Earth, living on a landmass, rich in minerals, arable
The
land,
guy
and
with
renewable
way more
energy
money than
potential.
all y'all. Stop
Here's what
playing.
makes Africa different from other investment opportunities.
Stop playing.
We're still writing our story. He pulled out a tablet, the first technology he displayed, and projected a simple map onto the screens behind it. It showed the African continent with a series of dotted lines crisscrossing from west to east. This is the Trans-Sahel Infrastructure Corridor, he announced. A network of roads, railways, power lines, and communication systems connecting Dakar to Djibouti.
They gonna build their
8,000
own.
kilometers of coordinated development across 12 nations. The largest infrastructure project in African history, designed not by foreign consultants, but by African engineers,
Tell 'em.
economists, and planners.
Tell
The room's energy had completely shifted.
them.
People were sitting forward, phones were being set
Paying
aside,
attention.
and several delegates were taking
That's
notes.
a ruler for you.
The total cost of this project is $800 million, Traoré continued. Less than Saudi Arabia spends on a single luxury resort development.
But
But
Saudi
the
wanna make
impact
some
would be
money.
transformational. Imagine connecting West Africa's agricultural abundance with East Africa's ports. Imagine solar farms in the Sahara powering industrial centers from Senegal to Sudan. Imagine high-speed internet connecting African universities with global research networks. Crown Prince bin Salman was now leaning forward, his elbows on the table, his full attention focused on the presentation. But here's why
Right.
this matters to Saudi Arabia specifically, Traoré said, returning to address the prince directly. This isn't just about African development. This is about positioning your kingdom as the bridge between continents. Every ton of cargo moving through this corridor could transit through Saudi ports. Every megawatt of energy could be supplemented by Saudi renewable technology. Every communication network could be enhanced by Saudi telecommunications investments. He clicked to the next slide, showing economic projections and trade flow estimates. Conservative estimates suggest this corridor would increase Saudi African trade by 400% within a decade. But more importantly, it would establish Saudi Arabia not just as a regional power, but as a global connector, the nation that helped unite Africa with Asia, Europe, and the Americas. The presentation was becoming more technical now, with detailed financial models and implementation timelines.
Why they talking crazy
Traoré
about
kept
it?
returning to his central theme: partnership rather than patronage, investment rather than charity, transformation rather than transaction. Your Highness, he said, advancing to his final slide, every great kingdom in history is remembered not for what it accumulated, but for what it built. The Egyptians built pyramids. The Romans built roads. The British built ships. What will Saudi Arabia build? He clicked off the presentation and returned to center stage. I propose that Saudi Arabia build bridges. Not physical bridges, human bridges, economic bridges. Bridges between the world's youngest continent and its most ambitious kingdom. The room was electric with attention now. This was no
Exactly.
longer the polite endurance of a minor nation's pitch.
Pay
This was a
attention
serious
after
policy
y'all.
proposal with real
The
strategic
lion is
implications.
awake.
But then Traoré did something completely unexpected. He closed his tablet, stepped back from the microphone, and began speaking without any technological support at all. However, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent hall,
Yeah.
I must be
Your
completely
attention.
honest with you. I didn't come here primarily to ask for your investment. A murmur of confusion rippled through the audience. Crown Prince bin Salman's expression sharpened with interest. I came here to offer you something far more valuable than a business opportunity, Traoré continued. I came to offer you a place in history, not as a kingdom that got rich from oil, but as a kingdom that helped other nations get rich from their own resources.
That's
Not
right.
as a country that bought influence, but as a country that built influence through partnership and respect. He paused, letting this distinction sink in. The Trans-Sahel corridor will be built, with or without Saudi participation. My country and our neighbors have already committed to making this happen. We have Chinese partners interested, European investors inquiring, and American corporations studying feasibility. We don't need rescue, we need partnership. The boldness of this statement was breathtaking.
Goddamn right.
Here
I
was a
love it.
representative from one of the world's
Traoré,
poorest
real
countries,
man's
essentially
man.
telling
Stop
one of the
playing. A
world's
smart,
richest countries
wise man.
that their participation was welcome, but not essential. But, Traoré continued, if Saudi Arabia chooses to join this project, you won't just be investing in infrastructure. You'll be investing in the future of South-South cooperation. You'll be demonstrating that wealth is most powerful when it creates more wealth, not when it simply accumulates more wealth. He began walking toward the Crown Prince's table again, but this time his approach felt less like a presentation and more like a conversation between equals.
It is.
Your Highness, you've spoken about Vision 2030 and Saudi Arabia's transformation into a global hub. But imagine Vision 2050, Saudi Arabia as the nation that helped transform an entire continent.
That's Bible
Imagine
prophecy.
Saudi companies not just operating in Africa, but growing with Africa. Imagine Saudi students studying in African universities that Saudi investment helped build. Imagine African students researching in Saudi laboratories that African minerals helped construct. The vision he was painting was expansive, ambitious, and completely different from the traditional donor-recipient relationship that usually characterized North-South economic partnerships. This is why I didn't prepare a PowerPoint presentation. Asking for money, Traore said. This is why I didn't bring a delegation of consultants with financial projections. This is why I came alone. One leader to another, offering partnership between equals. He stopped directly in front of the Crown Prince, close enough for a private conversation, but speaking loudly enough for the entire room to hear.
Man.
Your Highness, I believe that Saudi Arabia's greatest achievement won't be the tallest building or the fastest train or the most advanced artificial intelligence. Your greatest achievement will be proving that true power lies not in dominating markets, but in creating markets. Not in controlling resources, but in developing resources. Not in buying loyalty, but in earning respect.
That's right.
The room was absolutely
They
silent.
ain't got no respect.
This was either the most impressive diplomatic presentation anyone had witnessed, or the
Damn
most
right,
spectacular career
man.
suicide in modern international
No,
relations.
he gonna bite. He know Africa.
Crown
got
Prince
good.
bin Salman sat motionless for several long seconds, his expression unreadable.
He love this one
The
here.
tension was palpable.
I
Every
love
delegate
this.
in the
They're
room
fooling
understood
them. I
that they were
love this
facing
one.
a pivotal moment that could either launch a revolutionary partnership.
Man, it's
or
finna
end
be
in
revolutionary.
diplomatic
Africa done did the damn thing.
Finally, the Crown Prince spoke. His voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the silent hall. President Traore, he said, in the past 5 years, I have heard thousands of investment pitches. I have been presented with countless opportunities, proposals, and partnerships. Most of them focused on what Saudi Arabia could provide. Our capital, our markets, our strategic location, our influence. He paused, his eyes locked on Traore's. You are the first person to focus on what Saudi Arabia could become.
Damn right.
Prince
God.
spoke slowly, his movement causing a ripple of attention
That's a
throughout the
true
room.
man. A soldier.
When he reached his full height, he
Woo!
continued speaking, but now he was addressing not just Traore, but the entire
Man, that's
assembly.
them two young
Ladies
men right
and
there.
gentlemen, what we have just witnessed
Traore ain't
is
weak, so he can
precisely
go
the kind of
before.
thinking that will define the next century
Man,
of global development.
yes.
President Traore hasn't asked us to solve Africa's problems.
No, he
He
did.
has invited us to participate in Africa's solutions. He
Big deal.
began walking around his table,
Telling
moving
you,
closer to where
brothers,
Traore stood.
sisters, pay attention to Africa.
This is exactly the kind of partnership that Vision 2030 was designed to create. Relationships based on mutual benefit,
That's right.
shared growth, and respect for each partner's contributions.
That's right.
The Crown Prince stopped directly in front of Traore, close, enough that their conversation became personal rather than public, though everyone in the room strained to hear every word. Mr. President, he said, your Trans-Sahel infrastructure corridor represents precisely the kind of transformational investment that Saudi Arabia wants to support. Not because we see Africa as a charity case, but because we see Africa as a partner in building the world's economic future.
Yes. Yes.
Turn to address the broader audience. Saudi
Take
Arabia's
notes,
Public
you.
Investment Fund will commit $500 million to the first phase of the Trans-Sahel infrastructure corridor, with
Y'all hear
additional
that?
commitments contingent on project milestones and partner nation participation. The E announcement sent shockwaves through the room. Several delegates audibly gasped. This
Yeah.
wasn't just a significant financial commitment.
Yeah.
It represented a fundamental shift in how Saudi Arabia approached African partnerships.
That's what's
But the
up.
Crown Prince wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, Saudi Arabia will establish a permanent African Partnership Office in Riyadh, dedicated specifically to identifying and developing South-South cooperation opportunities.
Oh, that's
President
what's up.
Traoré, I would like to invite you to chair the advisory board for this new initiative. The offer was unprecedented.
What?
African leaders were typically invited to Saudi Arabia as supplicants or ceremony participants, never as strategic partners in designing Saudi policy.
Oh, man.
Traoré accepted with a
Two
simple
young
nod,
souls.
but his eyes conveyed the magnitude of what had just occurred. This wasn't just about money or infrastructure. It was about dignity, respect, and the recognition that partnership could be more powerful than patronage. Your Highness, Traoré replied, this partnership will be remembered as the moment when the global South truly began cooperating rather than competing, when wealth became a tool for creating wealth rather than simply accumulating wealth. The Crown Prince smiled, the first genuine expression of pleasure he'd shown all day.
Go, Traoré.
I believe you're
You want to
absolutely
get
right.
rid of him for what?
And I believe this partnership will benefit both our
That's what I'm
nations
showing
far
this
more
video.
than either of us can currently imagine.
Man, Africa and
The
Saudi
formal
Arabia.
session concluded with polite applause, but
Wow.
the real energy was in the private conversations that followed.
Wow.
Delegates from other African nations immediately approached Traoré,
I know
eager
he's
to
sick.
understand how their countries might participate in this new framework.
Oh, man.
European
Y'all
and
see
American
Africa?
representatives began calculating how this Saudi-African partnership relationships.
That's
But the
cool. Y'all
most
need to get
significant
down with
development
them.
happened away from the cameras and microphones. As delegates began filing out of the conference hall, Crown Prince bin Salman approached Traoré for a private conversation. Mr. President, he said quietly, I want you to know that your presentation today wasn't just impressive. It was necessary.
Yes.
Saudi Arabia has been looking for authentic partnerships rather than transactional relationships. You've shown us what that actually looks like.
Boy, Africa got a heart for everybody. Y'all know that. They gonna
Your
talk shit
Highness,
about this.
Burkina Faso has learned that dignity is more valuable than
And they
charity,
both
and
Muslim.
partnership is more powerful than patronage. Today proved that these principles can actually work in practice, not just in theory. The Crown Prince extended his hand for a handshake that felt less like diplomatic protocol and more like the beginning of a genuine alliance. Mr. President, I believe this is the beginning of something transformational for
them
both
two.
our regions. Say, news of the partnership spread beyond the conference
Man,
walls.
that's
The response was immediate and
Saudi
dramatic.
Arabia.
African
What?
stock markets surged as investors recognized the implications of Saudi-backed infrastructure development. Social
Saudi
media
get
exploded
invested
with
in it,
commentary about the new model of international cooperation.
Oh, wow.
Young Africans posted
Saudi
clips
y'all
of
can be
Traoré's
on top of
presentation
everybody.
with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like,"
Yeah.
and finally, someone speaking as an equal. International media coverage was extensive but divided. Western outlets focused primarily on the geopolitical implications, how this Saudi-African partnership might affect European and American influence on the continent.
Man, invest
Chinese
in it.
media
That's what you need
emphasized
to
the
do.
competition aspects, noting that this development could complicate China's Belt and Road Initiative in Africa. Middle Eastern publications celebrated the partnership as evidence of Saudi Arabia's growing global leadership. But perhaps the most significant response came from other African leaders. Within 48 hours of the Riyadh announcement, presidents and prime ministers from across the continent were reaching out to both Saudi Arabia and Burkina Faso, eager to participate in this new framework for international cooperation.
Wow.
The president of Senegal called to discuss connecting Dakar to the Trans-Sahel corridor.
Wow.
The Prime Minister of Ethiopia inquired about extending the network to connect with existing Chinese-built infrastructure. Even South Africa's leadership began exploring how their more developed economy could contribute to the continental project.
Oh,
What made this response
yeah.
particularly remarkable was its
Wow.
authenticity. These weren't the usual diplomatic pleasantries or obligatory expressions of support. These were serious inquiries from leaders who recognized that something
Wow.
fundamental had shifted
It's
in how
gonna happen.
African nations could engage with global partners.
Wow, Africa is fit
Back
to
in
rise,
Ouagadougou,
y'all.
Burkina Faso's
It
capital,
has
the
risen
reaction was
already.
electric.
It's in the, they
Citizens
believe
gathered
it.
around
They
radios and
stress it.
television sets to hear news of their president's
Wow.
diplomatic triumph. for a nation that had grown accustomed to being ignored or patronized
Wow.
by international partners. Seeing their leader treated as an equal by one of the world's most powerful kingdoms was profoundly meaningful.
Shit, that
But
Russia
Traoré
treated the
himself
same
remained
way.
focused on implementation rather than celebration.
Yes.
In interviews following
Trying to
his
go to
return
work,
from
Bikino.
Riyadh, he consistently emphasized
Man, I
that
wish
the
y'all
real
nothing
work
but the
was
best.
just beginning.
Y'all finna
A
blow
handshake
Africa.
in Saudi Arabia means nothing if we can't deliver results in Africa.
That's right.
He told reporters. Partnership is proven through performance, not promises.
That's right.
This practical approach characterized everything that followed. Rather than staging elaborate ceremonies or announcing unrealistic timelines, Traoré's government began the methodical work of turning diplomatic success into developmental progress.
That's right.
The first concrete step was establishing the Trans-Sahel Coordination Office in Ouagadougou, staffed jointly by Burkina Bay officials and Saudi technical advisors. Their mandate was simple but ambitious: transform the infrastructure corridor from concept to reality within 5 years.
They could do
The
it.
Saudi commitment proved to be more than symbolic. Within 3 months of the Riyadh meeting, Saudi engineers were conducting feasibility studies in the Sahel region. Saudi construction companies were bidding on preliminary contracts. Saudi banks were establishing correspondent relationships with African financial institutions. But perhaps most importantly, the partnership maintained its emphasis on equality and mutual benefit.
That's what's up. Get that
Rather
money,
than simply
y'all.
funding African projects
That's
with
what I've been telling y'all. You
Saudi
better
money,
invest
the
in Africa.
collaboration
You
involved
want a
genuine
return on
knowledge
your money.
transfer and
Well,
capacity
Saudi
building.
Arabia, one of the
African
two.
engineers worked alongside Saudi specialists.
If you
African
look at
economists
a lot of people,
contributed
tell
to
you something.
project planning. African
You look at a lot of what American companies are, and you will find a big chunk of Saudi ownership in it. And everything. When I looked at Facebook, I'm like, wow, they own a lot of stock in this stuff. These rides y'all be calling for, I believe they own that. Saudi got a lot of money in a lot of nations, family. You don't sleep on it. But Africa, oh my God. I just made a video yesterday talking about the opportunities now that they building. But this man building, and he's steady building those relationships, taking them smaller bills, which are big, and connecting them on a world scale through bigger nations. Oh my God. And they both collabing. Africa has went past. Whoa. Africa own one, y'all. I got to make some shirts. That's what I just told my lady. I got my notebook here. I'm taking notes, listening to things being said. I put on these shirts. People gonna want to know this because you can find hope in that with the money system. You ain't gotta just look at America. You gotta look at it global. And going back to Africa, ain't no far-fetched out there. I just told her, you keep talking about looking at Africa. What you keep looking at Africa? Woman. When Africa hit, that means our redemption. The people, we the people of the book, family. I'm telling you. And what is happening, I understand, but I'm looking at, okay, long run, these nations have to come together. And which will give us the opportunity to deal with them. But you have to deal with them in truth. You can't deal with them playing old politic games. Hell no. Now we all looking at each other as God's people. This is the framework as an equal partner. Each end must do their share. I'm with you, Africa. I'm rolling with you. Yeah, I'm with you, Africa. All of Africa riding. All of them, y'all need to check in with Troy Ray and become a part of that. Support that. Y'all gonna rise. Cut out the middleman. And the middleman, as far as the European nations, y'all can invest. You can't control everything. That's the problem. You want to control? No, invest. And that lightens the load. You don't have to spend all America's money in other nations. You can invest it. And take your people's taxes and invest it in them nations that's doing business. Things will ease up later on, but I wouldn't shun that. And I wouldn't let nobody even promote that type talk to me. Let's talk about investing because what we got is we losing, and that go hope, especially for our people. And it can work for y'all too. I see a lot of Europeans that move to Africa. A lot of Americans move there. Stop playing. They know the time. They've been moved there to be there for things like this. You better not miss on it with no looking at no politics. You gotta look at reality.
Companies were prioritized for construction contracts. This approach had profound implications beyond the immediate project.
Africa will look all the way
decades,
different.
African development had been characterized by dependency relationships,
Yeah.
either with former colonial powers, Cold War superpowers, or emerging economies like China. The Saudi partnership represented something genuinely different.
That nation
A
used to be
relationship
one.
between developing nations based on complementary strengths rather than
They know what
hierarchical
they got.
dependencies. The impact extended far beyond
That should
economics.
have been happening.
Young Africans began seeing international relations differently, not
Yeah,
as something that
because
happened to them, but as something they
we ain't sleep on the information that come out of there as far as Africans, how they be, you know, they highlight, we see a lot of bad things being highlighted. Well, them coming into having relationship, better relationships and y'all neighbors, that should help on both sides. But coming in as equals, we ain't playing no motherfucking games where you, no, we taking care of business because we finna establish something new in the earth that everybody, you want everybody to come in and be a part of it, to be invested in it. Not no one group of people owning, controlling everything. Hell no. You starve everybody. Them days over.
could actively shape.
You gotta
Universities
make the
across the
world,
continent
all
began
people,
offering new
God's people
programs in
great.
South-South cooperation and diplomatic strategy.
Not no,
African
just
think
no
tanks
one
started
nation.
producing research on alternative models of international partnership.
Yes.
6 months after the Riyadh meeting,
Wow.
the first section of the Trans-Sahel corridor broke ground in a ceremony that was deliberately modest but symbolically powerful. Rather than flying in international dignitaries for a lavish celebration, the groundbreaking featured local community leaders, regional engineers, and workers who would actually build the infrastructure. Traore's speech at the ceremony captured the significance of the moment. Today, we don't just break ground for a road. We break ground for a new model of how nations can work together. We prove that partnership is more powerful than patronage, that dignity is more valuable than charity, and that the global South can write its own story of development and prosperity. The road construction proceeded efficiently, with Saudi technical expertise combining with African labor and resources to produce results that exceeded initial projections. More importantly, the project generated significant employment opportunities for local communities while building genuine technical capacity that would outlast the specific infrastructure development. As the first year of the partnership concluded, its success had become undeniable.
What?
The Trans-Sahel corridor was ahead of schedule and under budget. African-Saudi trade had increased by 60%. Most significantly, the partnership had inspired similar collaborations between other global South nations. Brazil began...
That ought to stop a lot of the confusion that be going on. Build a rapport. Change the energy. Get the people active so they ain't got time to be thinking about the bullshit. They can get money, invest in their nations, be proud of what they can contribute to and establish and maintain it with hard work and dedication. Real dedication and love for your neighbor as equals. All that bullshit like we superior than y'all, no, we ain't coming like that. And y'all ain't gonna get over like that. It ain't happening. We make more together. Those used to be one nation if you do your research from a biblical perspective. Now the Bible, it even speaks to this. Family. Ron Dalton, check him out. Ronald Dalton Jr., the Hebrews to Negroes platform. Fair use copyright. They might flag this video if he was speaking it, but it is what it is. He speaks to this. It's written in the Bible. The Bible is alive.
And exploring infrastructure partnerships with Nigeria, India increased its engagement with East African technology sectors.
Nigeria, that's another
Mexico
one to watch.
established new trade relationships with North African manufacturing
But
centers.
to the rest.
The Saudi African model was spreading, creating a network of South-South partnerships that were reshaping global economic relationships. But the true measure of the partnership's success wasn't in statistics or trade figures. It was in the fundamental shift in how nations approached international cooperation. The traditional model of wealthy nations providing aid to poor nations was being supplemented by a new model of developing nations partnering with each other based on complementary strengths and mutual respect. Crown Prince bin Salman reflected on this transformation during a speech marking the first anniversary of the Riyadh meeting. President Traoré taught us that true leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions. He didn't ask us to solve Africa's problems. He invited us to participate in Africa's solutions. That invitation has transformed not just our relationship with Africa, but our understanding of what partnership actually means. For his part, Traoré remained characteristically focused on results rather than recognition. When asked about his success, he consistently emphasized the collective nature of the achievement. This partnership succeeded because it was based on truth rather than flattery, on mutual benefit rather than one-sided charity, and on respect rather than pity. Those principles can work anywhere, between any nations, if leaders have the courage to embrace them. The story of that day in Riyadh had become more than a diplomatic anecdote. It had become a model for how international relations could evolve in the 21st century. It proved that dignity and partnership weren't just moral ideals, but practical strategies that could produce better results than traditional aid and dependency relationships. As the Trans-Sahel corridor neared completion of its first phase, its impact was already visible.
I need to look that up.
New businesses were emerging along the route.
Y'all look that
Educational opportunities were expanding in connected communities. Most importantly, young Africans were seeing their continent differently, not as a place that needed to be rescued, but as a place that was actively building its own future.
That's right.
The partnership between Saudi Arabia and Burkina Faso had started with one man's refusal to ask for charity and his insistence on offering partnership instead. It had grown into a model that was inspiring similar collaborations across the global south and redefining how nations could work together in an interconnected world. And in Garango, that small village where the story began, 10-year-old Musa was now studying by electric light, dreaming of becoming an engineer, and growing up in a world where African leadership was reshaping international relations. The boy in the photograph had become a symbol of what was possible when partnership replaced patronage, when dignity trumped charity, and when leaders had the courage to demand respect rather than simply hoping for sympathy. The transformation was complete, but the impact was just beginning.
Man, that's beautiful. I got to look that up, y'all. You got Elon Musk a Tesla factory in Africa, bro.
What happens when the most underestimated nation in Africa?
Y'all gotta check this out, y'all. Fair use copyright. Africa ain't playing. This man is on the move. I'm talking about make the deal. Trump, I think he heard you loud and clear. This man making deals all over the earth, and it's inspiring relationships beyond the norm that's expanding and enriching in people's lives.
When the most underestimated nation in Africa decides to change the rules of the global technology game.
This out.
Today, I'm going to share with you an extraordinary story about determination, vision, and the courage to defy expectations. In the heart of West Africa, a country plagued by poverty, political instability, and the constant shadow of colonial exploitation, is now making headlines for something revolutionary. This is the story of Ibrahim Traoré, a man dismissed as just a soldier who is now on the verge of bringing Africa's first Tesla gigafactory to life. It's a tale of unexpected partnerships, behind-the-scenes strategizing, and the quiet power of proving critics wrong without saying a word. As we delve into this remarkable journey, you'll witness moments of humiliation turned into triumph, skepticism transformed into awe, and how sometimes the most powerful response to doubt isn't a loud argument, but silent, determined action. What happened in that Berlin boardroom shocked everyone present and is about to change the economic future of an entire continent. Stay with me until the end, because the final outcome of this audacious vision might just inspire you to rethink what's possible in your
Hell
own
yeah,
life.
that's why I'll be watching
The
it.
European investor's laughter cut through the tense atmosphere of the
Let me tell you something. I listen to this because it brings balance. I don't want to hear about negativity and violence all day and you ain't got no solution behind it. Like, what the fuck? I need to push the solution. If I know the solution and I see something that's good going on, I'm going to share that information with the people. And I'm going to continue to press and continue to push because I know it's haters out there that don't want this type of information getting out. Look it up. Don't just look at the videos, look it up. That's crazy. We should want to know something like that. Because look at the economy over here. The currency is losing power for real at a fast rate. And really at an alarming rate when you got nations like Burkina Faso and what they doing over there with Saudi Arabia. Game changer. And for Africa to be invested in that, and that's bad because ain't nobody telling us this. But do your due diligence. I'm sure looked at Sahel corridor up. I need to see that. I'm gonna look up the information and prove that or disprove it. But I know they making moves. Y'all gotta look at the inner development and and how it's expanding. It's really happening. Dude, look it up. Look it up. I'm telling you, I've been following since the beginning. I'm like, this one different. Certain words, language, people use. You can identify what cloth they come from. He said he come from the land of the upright. That's biblical, fam. That's biblical in every way. I'm gonna bring it out and prove it to you.
Berlin boardroom like a knife. His expensive suit creased as he leaned back in his chair, a smirk plastered across his face as he surveyed the African delegation seated across from him. Burkina Faso can't even power its own cities consistently for 24 hours, he said, not bothering to hide his condescension. And now you want to build a Tesla factory? Do you even understand the infrastructure requirements? His colleagues exchanged knowing glances around the polished mahogany table.
Dude,
Another ambitious African.
teaches
Project doomed to failure. Another waste of their valuable time.
Oh yeah.
Ibrahim Traoré sat motionless at the center of the Burkinabe delegation. His posture remained perfectly straight, his expression unchanged. The room fell silent, everyone waiting for his response to the blatant humiliation. But there was no visible rage, no desperate defense, no words at all. Instead, Traoré reached slowly into his worn leather briefcase and removed a simple manila folder. With deliberate calm, he placed it gently on the table and slid it toward the center where everyone could see it. Before we continue, he said quietly, his voice steady and confident, perhaps you should examine what we've already accomplished. One of the Tesla vice presidents present, a woman with sharp eyes who had remained silent throughout the meeting, reached for the folder first. As she opened it, her eyebrows rose incrementally with each page she turned. After a moment, she passed the documents to her colleagues without comment. When the folder reached the European investor who had laughed, his smirk gradually faded. Page after page, his expression transformed from amusement to confusion to something that looked surprisingly like concern.
Okay, here's the third introduction of the word upright, which in the Hebrew means kameiyu, kamemiyu, kamimi, kam Kamemu, Kamemu, Kamemu elevation. That is, adverbally, erectly. To stand erect means to stand up. Figuratively, upright. That's the third time it was used. You got Genesis, and I believe that's Exodus, where the word was used. But in this, the way it was used here, as you can see, is denoting that this is an upright person, a person that follows the instructions of his king. In this case, he keeps the commandments of the king with love, you know. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim, which brought you forth out of the land of Egypt. He's describing a time when the ancestors was in, like we are, the descendants of our people that were enslaved. So imagine what your people are under the rule of law of the nations. You can say, oh, they know it. No, shut up. Look at the laws. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim, which brought you forth out of the land of Egypt. No, you shut them up with the truth, that ye should not be their bondmen. So it's bring you out of a state of lowness into a higher state. And I have broken the bands of your yoke. So you're going through the different levels, learning things, receiving power first, and then walking in it. You walking in it. And it materializing when you walking in the instruction of it. You didn't receive it. You walked as if you already had it. And it comes upon you. The spirit comes on you. The bands of your yoke, and made you go upright. But if ye will not hearken, if ye will not hearken unto me, and will not do all these commandments, and if ye shall despise my statutes, or if your soul abhor my judgments, so that ye will not do all my commandments, but that ye break my covenant, I also will do this unto you. I will even appoint over you terror, consumption, and a burning agony that shall consume the eyes and cause sorrow of heart. And ye shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemy shall eat it. You hear that? And there's more, but I'm gonna get to make my point. Torah spoke of being from the land of the upright. So what that signifies is he's signifying that they are people that keeps the instruction of the Most High. Fair use copyright. Fair use copyright. Back to the video. My bad.
The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. What exactly was in that folder that could silence a room full of tech industry veterans and venture capitalists? What Ibrahim Traoré had brought with him to Berlin was about to change the future of an entire continent. 6 months earlier, the presidential palace in Ouagadougou had been uncovered. In his office, Ibrahim Traoré was reviewing a stack of rejection letters from international development banks. The latest one, on official World Bank letterhead, cited political uncertainty and insufficient collateral assets as reasons for declining Burkina Faso's request for infrastructure funding. Across from him sat Aminata Diallo, his most trusted economic advisor and former professor at the University of Ouagadougou. She watched as he closed the folder containing the rejections. They will never fund our development, Traoré said matter-of-factly. Not until we prove we can generate value without them. Aminata nodded. So what's your plan? Traoré walked to a large map of Burkina Faso pinned to the wall. We've been looking at this all wrong, he said, tracing his finger across the vast open spaces of his country. We've been begging for scraps to build an outdated system. He turned back to face her. Our greatest weakness can become our greatest strength. We have no legacy infrastructure to replace. We can skip decades of development. With what resources? Aminata asked. We barely have enough foreign currency reserves to import fuel for 3 months. Traore's eyes narrowed. We don't need to import what we can produce ourselves. We have 3 things the world needs: sun, land, and lithium. He walked to his desk and pulled out a different folder. This one filled with geological surveys his government had commissioned in secret. The world is moving toward renewable energy and
y'all hear her ask me why I got the TV so loud. Y'all hear that loudmouth ass cackling hen she listening to? That thing so loud. I don't know why y'all listen to people that talk that crazy stuff and cause all that confusion. How can you receive what's being said? It's nothing but confusion. You narrating somebody else's story. Talk about our strengths. Let's build from our strengths, not a weakness. But people will send money in and cash out them and all kind of stuff so they can continue doing that. I'm like, huh? Oh, that's crazy.
electric vehicles. The West
I'm
needs
paying
batteries.
attention to where the
They
money
need
going.
lithium.
Where
And who has some of the largest untapped lithium deposits in Africa? Aminata's eyes widened as she reviewed the geological data.
Exactly.
These readings can't be right. If they were, foreign mining companies would be... They don't know, Traore interrupted.
Exactly.
The previous government buried these
Tell 'em
reports
all
to
your
negotiate
stuff.
better terms later. But we're not going to sell our resources. We're going to use them ourselves. For what? Aminata asked, though something in her expression suggested she was beginning to understand.
Thank
For
you.
energy independence first, Traore replied, and then for something much bigger. He hesitated, then voiced the audacious idea he'd been developing. We're going to build Africa's first gigafactory. Aminata stared at him in disbelief.
Exactly.
A battery gigafactory?
Take
Here?
that crap and throw it
Ibrahim,
away.
that's impossible.
How?
He finished for her. That's what they said about Rwanda becoming a tech hub, about Kenya leading mobile payments, about Morocco building one of Africa's fastest trains. He leaned forward. We will never be respected until we produce what we consume. That begins now. In the weeks that followed, Traore assembled a special task force that operated almost entirely under the radar. He avoided the usual government bureaucracy, instead personally selecting individuals based on skill and discretion rather than political connections. The team included engineering professors from the University of Ouagadougou, recent graduates from technical schools, farmers with intimate knowledge of the land, and even a few soldiers with backgrounds in logistics and security. They called themselves the Silence, a name that reflected their covert operation and their response to a world that had written them off. Their mission was ambitious but precisely defined. Design Africa's first self-powered gigafactory, a facility that would produce both solar panels and the batteries needed to store their energy. Every meeting stays off official records, Traore instructed the group during their first gathering in a converted west on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. Everything we discuss remains confidential until we're ready to move forward. 1. Young engineer raised her hand. Sir, with respect, why the secrecy? Shouldn't we be proud of this initiative? Traore nodded thoughtfully.
We're proud, but we
Pride
ain't telling
comes after
everybody.
results, not before.
Exactly.
The moment we announce this project, we'll
All
face
your haters
resistance
coming out.
from foreign companies who profit from our dependency, from countries who see us as nothing more than a source of raw materials. We need to be far enough along that they can't stop us. On a stormy night 3 weeks into the project, while rain pounded the metal roof of their warehouse headquarters, the Silence team worked tirelessly. The power had gone out, ironically highlighting the very problem they were trying to solve, but they continued working by the light of solar-powered lamps they had built themselves. Musa Wedraogo, a 26-year-old electrical engineering graduate, was running simulations on a laptop powered by a prototype battery. Around him, other team members mapped potential solar field locations across the country, analyzed soil samples from proposed construction sites, and tested small-scale battery prototypes. What if Tesla doesn't respond? Asked Fatima, a materials science specialist.
They gonna respond.
What if they laugh at us? The room fell quiet.
Yeah, right.
It was the question many had thought. but few had voiced. Building a gigafactory without international expertise seemed practically impossible. Traoré, who had been silently observing their work from the corner, finally spoke. "They will," he said with a small smile, "until they can't." He walked to the center of the room. "But understand this, whether Tesla partners with us or not, we are moving forward. If they say no, we start smaller, learn as we go, and scale up. The future of Burkina Faso will not be determined by foreign approval." Many nodded, but doubt lingered in some eyes. Traoré understood their concern. What they were attempting was unprecedented, not just for Burkina Faso, but for the entire continent. "Remember," he continued, "we're not just building a factory. We're building proof that Africa can lead in the industries of tomorrow." 3 weeks later, after countless revisions and refinements to their plans, Traoré sent an encrypted message directly to Tesla headquarters. It wasn't addressed generically to the company's public contact email. Instead, through connections he had carefully cultivated, he managed to obtain a direct line to Elon Musk himself. The message wasn't a traditional business proposal. There was no begging, no appeals to charity or corporate social responsibility. Just data. Hard, compelling data. Traoré outlined Burkina Faso's solar energy potential with detailed maps, showing average daily sunlight hours exceeding those of many existing Tesla facilities. He included the confidential geological surveys confirming substantial lithium deposits. Most importantly, he provided evidence of the local talent, profiles of the Silence team members, their qualifications, and examples of their innovative work under resource constraints. He ended the message with the project's code name, Volta Earth, honoring both the country's famous river and the pioneer of battery technology, and a single, powerful sentence: "If you say no, someone else will say yes." Then they waited.
That nigga gonna hurry up and reach out.
2 weeks. The Silence team continued their work,
Do your
but
thing.
morale began to waver.
What?
Had the message even been read? Was it all a waste of time?
No.
Then, 23 days after sending the message, Traoré received a response. It wasn't from Musk himself, but from Tesla's vice president of international operations. The message was brief. "Your data is compelling. We're interested in discussing further. Can you host a delegation next month?" The silence erupted in cautious celebration when Traoré shared the news. It wasn't a commitment, but it was something many thought impossible. They had caught Tesla's attention. "We have 1 month," Traoré told them when the excitement settled. 1 month to build something they can't ignore. What followed was a period of intense activity. The team split into 3 groups, each with a specific mandate. The first would construct a working mini-grid in a rural village, powered entirely by solar energy with battery storage. The second would refine their battery cell prototype to approach Tesla's efficiency standards. The third would prepare detailed light plans for the gigafactory itself, addressing everything from water usage to supply chain logistics. They worked around the clock, fueled by a mixture of patriotism, professional pride, and the tantalizing possibility of creating something transformative. When problems arose, and they frequently did, the team improvised solutions with the limited resources available. When the Tesla delegation arrived, led by the vice president who had responded to Traoré's message, they were visibly surprised by what they found. The mini-grid was operational, powering a small village that had never before had reliable electricity. The battery prototype, while not matching Tesla's cutting-edge technology, achieved impressive results, considering the constraints under which it was developed. The delegation spent 3 days in Burkina Faso, asking probing questions, examining the Silence's work in detail, and meeting with Traoré to discuss his vision. At the end of their visit, the vice president made no promises, but said something that gave the team hope. "We'll need to discuss this at headquarters, but what you've accomplished here is remarkable." 2 days after the Tesla delegation departed, Traoré received another message. This one was more formal. Tesla was interested in exploring a potential partnership, but they would need to meet with a broader group of stakeholders, including potential investors. The meeting would take place in Berlin in 3 months' time. Traoré understood what this meant. The technical team at Tesla might be impressed, but the financial decision makers needed convincing. And they would be much harder to impress with prototype batteries and village mini-grids. For the next 3 months, the Silence worked with even greater intensity. They expanded the mini-grid to cover 3 more villages. They improved their battery design, inching closer to Tesla's efficiency benchmarks. Most importantly, they developed detailed financial projections showing how the Gigafactory could become profitable within 5 years. When it was time for the Berlin meeting, Traoré selected a small delegation to accompany him. Aminata for her economic expertise, Musa for his technical knowledge, and 2 other key members of the Silence. They prepared meticulously, anticipating every possible question and objection. What they couldn't prepare for, face. The Berlin boardroom was intimidating by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Minimalist furniture that probably cost more than most Burkinabes earned in a year. And walls adorned with awards and recognition from the global tech community. The meeting began cordially enough. The 3 Tesla vice presidents present, including the woman who had visited Burkina Faso, made polite introductions. But the European investors, who had been invited to potentially help finance the project, made little effort to hide their skepticism. When Traoré finished his initial presentation, the room was silent for a moment. Then came the laughter. Burkina Faso can't even power its own cities, said the investor who had laughed, a man representing one of Europe's largest venture capital firms. And you want to build a factory? Do you even understand the scale of what you're proposing? Putain. Didn't mean it as a joke. He meant it as humiliation, a reminder of what he perceived as Africa's proper place in the global order. That's when Traoré placed the folder on the table. As it made its way around the room, the atmosphere shifted, palpably. Inside were photographs documenting the mini-grids now operating in 4 rural villages. Systems built entirely by the Silence team, using locally sourced materials wherever possible. There were detailed technical specifications for the battery, cell they had designed, now operating at 91% of Tesla's efficiency. Most surprising to many in the room were the aerial photographs showing land already cleared for the future Gigafactory, complete with solar arrays already under construction. Tesla VP, who had visited Burkina Faso, nodded slightly as she watched her colleagues review the material. She had seen it firsthand, but even she seemed impressed by how much progress had been made in the months since her visit. Who built all this? Asked one of the other Tesla VPs, genuine curiosity in his voice. Students, soldiers, farmers, Traoré replied quietly. People you would pass on the street without noticing. We don't wait for change, we build it. The European investors who had laughed were now studying the financial projections with a furrowed brow. These numbers, they can't be accurate. The labor costs alone are significantly lower than in Europe or America. Aminata interrupted smoothly. And our energy costs approach 0 after initial installation of the solar infrastructure. What we lack in existing infrastructure, we make up for in efficiency and innovation. But the political risk, another investor began, is factored into our contingency planning, Traoré responded. And I would suggest that a country taking control of its own industrial development is inherently more stable than one dependent on foreign aid and resource extraction. The meeting continued for 3 more hours, with increasingly technical questions about supply chains, quality control, and environmental impact. The Burkinabe delegation answered each one with precision and confidence, occasionally deferring to each other's expertise, but never once appearing flustered or unprepared. By the end, even the most skeptical investors were engaged in serious discussion about potential financing structures. No commitments were made, but the tone had shifted dramatically from dismissive amusement to cautious interest. As they gathered their materials to leave, the Tesla VP, who had visited Burkina Faso, approached Traoré. Why didn't you show this level of detail in your initial proposal? She asked quietly. Traoré gave her a measured look. You have believed it without seeing it first? She considered this, then nodded once.
Yeah, damn right.
We'll be in touch within the week.
I know.
The silence team was waiting when Traoré and his delegation returned to Ouagadougou. They gathered in their warehouse headquarters, eager to hear how the Berlin meeting had gone. They didn't say yes, Traoré told them frankly. But they didn't know either. Some faces fell, but Musa spoke up. What happens now? We continue. Building, Traoré said simply. With or without Tesla, with or without European money. We've already proven we can create working systems. We scale up from here. 2 days later, as the silence team was expanding their battery production capabilities, Traoré received an encrypted message on his phone. It was from Tesla headquarters. The message was brief but clear. Elon Musk wanted to speak with him directly. The call was scheduled for the following day.
No, definitely.
When it came, Musk was characteristically direct. Your team has impressive capabilities, he said after brief introductions. But I have concerns about the political situation in your region.
The fuck they gonna do?
Understandable, Traoré replied. But consider this. A gigafactory bringing thousands of jobs and energy independence creates political stability. It gives people a stake in maintaining order. Good point, Musk acknowledged. Another concern. Can you guarantee protection of intellectual property?
What?
We're not asking for your most advanced technology, Traoré countered. We're proposing a partnership where we contribute land, resources, labor, and political support. You contribute technical expertise and access to your supply chain. Both sides benefit. The conversation continued for almost an hour, ranging from technical specifications to philosophical discussions about sustainable development.
Yeah.
Musk asked probing questions, occasionally challenging Traoré's assertions, but always listening carefully to the responses. When the call ended, Musk made no promises beyond saying he would discuss the matter with his executive team. 3 tense days followed. The silence team continued their work.
That's
But
right.
all were
Build
anxious
y'all
for
shit.
news.
Don't wait.
Traoré maintained his usual calm demeanor, but even he checked his phone more frequently than normal. Then it happened. At 3:47 a.m. Ouagadougou time, Elon Musk posted on his X, formerly Twitter account. Africa's future is built by its people. Tesla will partner with Burkina Faso to pilot the Volta Rebirth Factory, the first of its kind on the continent. Energy innovation doesn't belong to one nation or continent. It belongs to humanity.
That's right.
Within hours, the post had gone viral. International. Media outlets scrambled to understand.
Dude say some dumbass shit, but a calm demeanor when you ask him will shut that down. You see how he, even when Traoré in the last video I just recorded and posted, how he dealt with the Arab nations, the ruler, the prince of Saudi Arabia, the prince, on an equal partnership footing and a level of respect. You see how it changed, the shift. That's what's happening, family, and it's fruitful and it's good.
And what was happening? Who was Ibrahim Traoré? Why Burkina Faso? What was the Volta Rebirth Factory? Financial analysts called it a high-risk venture with uncertain
Sit your ass
returns.
down.
The French energy lobby, which had significant investments in West African fossil fuel infrastructure, released a statement, project dangerous
Shut up.
and undermining regional energy security. And the European investor who had laughed in the Berlin boardroom. He never spoke publicly about the project, but his firm quietly reached out to Traoré's office to discuss potential investment opportunities.
Yeah.
What do you think about this bold vision so far? Can one underestimated country really change the future of energy in Africa?
Goddamn right.
Drop a comment with your thoughts before we continue with what happened next.
Africa is
3
taking
months
over.
after
They
Musk's
got the
announcement,
goods. They don't need your
construction
approval.
officially began on the Volta Rebirth
Oh,
Factory.
crazy.
The location chosen was a 500-acre site 15 kilometers outside Ouagadougou, close enough to the
Y'all
capital
gonna
for
wake up.
logistical
They'll get it.
purposes, but with ample room for expansion. The groundbreaking ceremony was notably modest, No red carpets, no champagne, no celebrities. Instead, Traoré arrived with the silence team and a group of workers from nearby villages who had been hired and trained for the construction phase. A small contingent of international press had managed to secure invitations, including reporters from Reuters, Bloomberg, and several African news outlets. They watched as Traoré, dressed in a simple work shirt rather than formal attire, picked up a shovel alongside the workers to break ground. One Western journalist approached him afterward, notepad in hand. Mr. Traoré, critics say this project is more symbolic than practical. How do you respond? Traoré gestured toward the workers already beginning to clear the site, where solar panels would eventually power the construction equipment. Does this look symbolic to you? In 6 months, this site will be generating power. In 18 months, it will be producing batteries. Judge us by our results, not by opinions. Another reporter pushed forward. Why here? Why now? Burkina Faso isn't known for manufacturing or technology. Traoré allowed himself a small smile.
Y'all check that
because
out,
they
man.
said it was impossible, he replied,
My phone
and because our children deserve better
Peace and blessings,
than
y'all.
to inherit our limitations.
Dang.
As construction progressed, Traoré